My mum went to school in your electorate, to the Presbyterian Ladies' College at Peppermint Grove there, and I spent some very happy moments of my childhood getting dumped in the surf off Cottesloe Beach, beautiful part of the world. But I can't help thinking that maybe you got dumped once too often recently, because what else would explain this net zero emissions brain snap? What were you thinking, David?
So, Rowan, can I tell you, and look, I'm glad you've given me this opportunity to clarify this because, you know, some people don't read and some people don't listen. What we have said is that we want zero net emissions for government-owned energy utility and, in fact, for the state government by 2030. Not for the state. Look, industry can look after itself. You know that nearly every major corporation in Australia, BHP, Rio, Woodside, and all of those great companies have all got targets of zero net emissions of 2050. Look, we think they'll get there. What we think is that government should show leadership in this area. We shouldn't be moralising to others. We should be dealing with our own emissions. And so, you know, I need to clear that up for your listeners because I know there's been a deal of misinformation about that. We're talking about government showing leadership, going to zero net emissions by 2030.
OK, David, but that's not originally what Zach Kirkup said, so obviously you guys have sat Zach down and gone, mate...
Can I tell you, that's exactly what Zach Kirkup said. It's exactly what he said. As I said, you know the old story of, you know, a lie gets around halfway around the world before the truth gets its trousers on, as Churchill said. That's OK. Look, I was there when Zach said it, OK? So we'll that is clearly it. And I know there's been a lot of speaking at shadows on this. We're talking about government-owned power utilities and government showing leadership, which we think is important.
Rita.
Try to attack the Labor government from the left, from the green left. I mean, you've pulled an ABC. That's what the ABC do when Labor's in power. They try to attack them from the far left. I mean, surely you should be providing a viable alternative for Conservative centre-right voters rather than trying to out-Labor Labor.
No, look, this isn't out-labouring Labor. I tell you what we're really concerned about. We're concerned that the state Labor government has increased power charges by 20% over the last 4 years. They're going to increase them by almost 8% over the next 4 years on their plan. What we know is that this plan will deliver lower energy costs in Western Australia. And can I say, you know, people on the East Coast don't have any understanding of the energy market in Western Australia, but in fact we've got a fantastic regulatory system and we know that moving to renewables and getting rid of that coal-fired generation capacity, the government-owned capacity, is going to save money. Those power stations in Collie have been subsidised $628 million over the last 2 years. They are a massive cost on the taxpayers of Western Australia and we don't need them for reliable power in Western Australia. Western Australia has a really well-regulated system in terms of price, but also a well-regulated system in terms of backup capacity. We've got 3,000 megawatts of installed backup capacity right now. Our peak capacity use is about 2,500 megawatts. So we know right now you could turn those stations off and you'd save the taxpayers a fortune.
James.
Well, I'm just really confused about all of this. I mean, where on earth have you seen moving from traditional coal-fired and other sorts of power generation into renewables actually lower electricity costs? I can tell you it hasn't happened here on the East Coast. And what message does it send to some of the huge companies that make WA home, like your own former employers like Alcoa, that basically says that you know, fossil fuel extraction, that sort of business, you know, is no longer welcome in WA?
Well, can I tell you, all of those companies you're talking about, and I love those companies. I've worked in resources for 24 years. They've all made the commitment to go to zero net emissions by 2050. Look, we support them in doing that. We know that's not trivial. Look, electricity generation in Western Australia is only 12% of Western Australia's total energy consumption. So it's very much the smaller part. We know this is the easier part to deal with. And can I say, you know, I just get frustrated with this whole debate. How do I get frustrated with this whole debate? You know, the power stations in Collie, people talk about baseload. They're not baseload. They're slow-acting backup generation capacity. Do you know they're turned off for half the time? they're actually not providing any electricity for half the time, and those power stations are getting destroyed because of it. In 2013, the coal-fired power stations only ran for 30% of the time. So what they are is slow-acting backup, and Western Australia is going through a massive energy transformation. We want to do this in a planned way. We don't want a slow, bleeding death in Collie.
But how does this cut people's bills?
We want a defined transition. How do you mean how people feel? You know, I guess people in Western Australia are concerned about energy prices not increasing. They're concerned about making sure that the lights are on. And this plan is a very carefully considered plan that allows for that transition for that smaller part of our power generation. There in 2024, you know, Collie's gradually dying in those power stations. 2024, there'll only be 740 megawatts of capacity in those stations, and they'll only be on for half the time. That's out of 2,500 megawatts of power consumption.
So, David, James was asking how this actually cuts bills.
Oh, easily. Look, you'd know, and anyone who looks into this, there's a few things. Western Australia is the best place in the world for renewable energy. The Midwest of Western Australia, if you talk about the capacity factors for renewable energy, which some of your listeners would know, there's no place in the world better that with the combination of wind and solar delivers even a power across a 24-hour period. The reason is the wind blows when the sun doesn't shine, and the sun shines when the wind's not blowing. Now,
but can I, David, can I just pick you? Can I just, David, sorry, can I just pick you up on that, because that's not strictly true. If you had an overcast period where you had low wind activity, I know you don't want the Texas example, so I'm not going to insult your intelligence with that one.
When we get snowstorms, tell me about it.
Exactly. But what is your worst case scenario that you've factored in? So what, 4 or 5 days with no wind and no sun? What would it be?
You can go any period of time. We've got 3,000 megawatts of backup diesel and gas-fired capacity to cover when the wind doesn't blow and when the sun doesn't shine. And what we've said is, so in the first 5 years, that's correct. So in the first 5 years, we're going to shut down that coal-fired capacity, put in 1,500 megawatts of renewable. We've already got the 3,000 megawatts of backup reserve capacity. We're also going to put in a 500 megawatt battery. Now, you know, your listeners will get excited about batteries. I know batteries don't provide long-term backup, but what they do is provide stability for fast switching, and they can provide short-term backup.
Rita,
let me go on.
Sorry, David.
David. Let me go on, because you asked the question, I'm going to answer the question, and that is, over the next 5 years, we look at a transfer and look at other ways of backing up that reserve capacity. Look, I've already spoken to one of the major agencies that works in this space and works in the remote regions, you know, and they believe that that is something that's achievable. It's not trivial. We know it's not trivial. We know it's a bold vision, but we know we can transition that, recognising that that backup capacity only runs for a shorter period of time, but it could run all year if it has to.
Rita.
Now, you talked about the cost to the taxpayer to subsidise the coal-fired capacity, but what's the cost for the renewables? How much public money is underpinning this program and the expenditure to make your policy, bringing your policy to a point where it can be implemented? Sorry, I lost my words there.
It's really straightforward. You know, we've got and it is a detail, but we've got a capacity market. On the East Coast, you've got an energy market. Our market is based on ensuring that we have adequate backup for our electricity. On the East Coast, you've got this laissez-faire approach where energy prices go from negative to ridiculous. We don't have that here. And so they're a contract, but it's the combination of the renewables. Look, they're the lowest cost, second lowest cost capital installed. Gas turbines are the lowest cost capital installed, but of course the renewables are overwhelmingly the lowest cost operational cost. So those combined with the backup capacity give you a net lower cost.
But what's the public cost? You had a cost for what the taxpayers are paying now for coal, but what's the cost for this renewable plan?
Look, the cost for renewable, that'll come down to contracts with the companies. But the order of magnitude is around 10 cents. Around 10 cents a kilowatt hour is about the cost.
We're just running out of time. So what is the cost to you? I don't want to misquote Zach Kirkup, but what is the cost to you and to the Liberals of your leader saying that you can't possibly win the election?
Look, you know, we're facing, you know, Zach's being honest to the electors and saying we can't, you know, this is just an enormous, unusual time for us. But what we do know is that we have to be able to hold the Labor government to account, and we need Liberals in Parliament to do that. We're the only party that does it, and that's what Zach's fighting for. I'm fighting for my seat, and I'm fighting for other seats in this state to make sure that we can hold a Labor government to account, who's a shoddy Labor government. Outside of COVID, they've got nothing. You know, they destroyed our domestic economy.
Well, inside of COVID, they've got nothing there. Inside of COVID, and your opposition has been so weak, you have not at one point challenged them on their insane border closures, on their backward policies. You've been lockstep with them every step of the way. I mean, how can you expect people to elect you when you're not actually giving them an alternative?
I tell you what, the people of Western Australia expect from us, Rita. The people of Western Australia expect us to follow medical advice and to make sure they're safe. And what we've said right along is that we'll support medical advice
says shut down the whole state for one case? What medical advice says close your borders when there's no... Come on, that's not medical advice, Rita, unless you're getting your medical...
Rita, the Chief Medical Officer, that's exactly the advice that they've given, and we're not going to second
guess them.
Have you seen that advice? Well, I'm a PhD, but I'm not a doctor.
Have you seen the advice? Have you seen evidence that backs it?
We've seen some of the advice, but what we do know is the people of Western Australia overwhelmingly believe that's the path that you should follow. So we're not going to focus on. We'll make sure that the government does things properly, but equally we're going to focus on the economy post-COVID. And we know the Labor Party does not understand the economy, does not know how to grow business, and that's what our policies are about.